Hi, welcome to Minute with Mickey, a time for us to wonder about the story of the four lepers and the Syrian army. This story has so many disturbing features to it because it talks about what happens when people are desperate for food and for being able to stay alive. I think the questions that I have about this probably are similar ones that you might have. And so let's take these a little bit almost like one at a time and ask the question, and hopefully it will drive you back into the text. First of all, the question is, do we have any good kings here? Seems to me that we have bad kings on both sides. Why is it that the Syrian army, who had just been treated nicely in the story of the blind soldiers previously to this, why is it that Ben-Hadad decides again to go up against Israel? In the Old Testament, I think that we need to recognize that we see and read stories not about what God decides is a good thing to have people choose to do, but God just records all the stuff that people do in terms of their bad choices. So here we have two bad kings, the king of Israel, the king of Syria, bad things happening, even after God has shown grace on so many levels to both of them in the previous chapters. But greed seems to win out. The idea that people were starving so much that they would choose to do these horrible things, first of all, that so much money would be spent on a donkey's head. And I just found that so repulsive that people would want to eat a donkey's head. And of course, that's unclean meat. So if that's how much they'd pay for that, just imagine how much they would have to pay for anything that would be good. And does that mean that they couldn't find anything good? This was all that was left? John spends a little bit of time talking about the dove dropping idea. And of course, the first time I heard that, it was just like so disgusting to me. And then I just think that you should go and listen to his insights on this because it's very helpful. Next, the question I have is, why is it that people would choose to eat their own children? This to me speaks to two things. First, Deuteronomy 28. God foresaw, here's what will happen to you when you disobey me. These are the things that will end up happening. The idea of eating one's children is not unusual in other cultures that were not part of the Hebrew tradition. Beyond Israel and all the surrounding countries, this kind of treatment was done all the time. It's part of pagan ritual, pagan traditions, things that had nothing to do with the God of Israel. And that just shows how low the Israel nation had sunk, that this is what they would do. And yet, it speaks back to what God said. If you disobey, here's the curses that will come to you. I would recommend going back to Deuteronomy 28. Take a look at the blessings in the first few verses and then the curses in the next verses, and recognize for myself as I looked at it, I wondered, oh my goodness, how many of these curses are beginning to happen in our country, in our land, in our world, for those who do not obey God. The next thing I wondered about was, is Gehazi one of these four lepers? Remember, he had left Elisha because of what had happened when he chose to be greedy? Because as these four lepers are getting a part of this spoil from the Syrian army, there's one of them who speaks up and says, wait a minute, we will be judged by God. So I thought, I wonder if that isn't Gehazi sort of showing up again. You may want to take a look into the future chapters and see if you don't see him again. They choose to do the right thing. At first, they are very selfish, but then later they choose to do the right thing. And then notice the parallel between the stories of the blind soldier and Elisha's servant, whose eyes were opened and were able to see the fiery chariots around. Wonder if these are the same chariot noises that were heard by the Syrian army that made them flee. For some reason, God continues to show mercy. He spared the Syrian army any further damage if the Israel army was going to go against them eventually. He spared the Israel, even in their horrible, horrible idolatry, he spared them, the Syrian army overtaking them. He gave the Israelite the spoils of the Syrian army. It's amazing to me that God continues to show that kind of mercy. And yet at the same, when we read it in a story like this, and yet at the same time, aren't you thankful for the mercy that God shows? And at the same time, we have this other little piece where Ben-Hadad's advisor is cursed for not believing. How many times are you not believing? Am I not believing? Lord, I think we want to speak the way it says in the New Testament, help me with my unbelief. What is this story saying to you? So many ridiculous features in this thing, and yet it is part of that culture and part of the norm. And nowhere in here is God saying it was right for these people to do what they were doing. The only thing we see right is what God does to provide grace and mercy once again. Have a great week.